Hello, everyone, and welcome to my third update of my top-down racing game in development for the Vectrix called Canyon Run. I apologize for the length of time that it's been since my last update. I'll say a bit more about that later, but for now, I just want to jump in and show you guys the main new gameplay feature that's been added, and that is AI opponents. The game will support up to 3 simultaneously, and I'll just show you the collisions first because it's easier to do when they're not moving. You can basically knock these guys around like billiard balls. And I'll set them off so you can see their performance. So as you can see, the AI does a good job of navigating the course, and I have trouble keeping up with the one in the lead. The lead one moves at the same speed as the player. The one behind him is a little bit slower, and the third one is a little bit slower still. That isn't necessarily how they're going to be configured in the final game, and it isn't necessarily going to be this hard. But it's much easier to dumb down AI than it is to make it smarter. So I think this means that I'll be able to scale the AI to whatever difficulty that I need for whatever scenario. A much better test for the AI would be the stress test level. I originally created this level to stress test the track rendering engine, but it does a good job of testing the AI as well because it has a lot of sharp turns. So I'll set these guys off, and yeah, you can see they do a good job of navigating even this track as well. It feels much more like a game now, and is much more exciting, but there's still a lot of work left to do. I still would like to have a variety of gameplay modes so that, it wouldn't be just racing against 3 other AI vehicles on every track, and then string those scenarios together to form a narrative. But that's going to depend entirely on how much storage space I have, and I haven't determined what that's going to be yet because I haven't researched cartridges at all yet. It would be nice to throw some obstacles in, but I have to make sure that the AI would be capable of navigating those, so it's something that I might look into later. As before, all of these tracks are temporary. The current vehicle model was only intended to be a placeholder originally, and I would really like to have each vehicle have its own distinct look so that you could tell them apart easily. But that is also going to depend on storage space, so I'm not sure if that's going to be feasible yet. Performance-wise, I can keep the game near 50 Hz with 2 AI vehicles. It does start to slow down a little with 3 to around 43 Hz. But the flickering really isn't noticeable with 3, so I think it'll be safe to say that I'll be able to have 3 vehicles in the final version of the game. There are still some things I have to add, sound effects in particular, and I haven't done any audio programming yet on the Vectrix, so I don't know how demanding that'll be. But on the flip side, I also still haven't ported the code to assembly yet, which is something I'd like to do. So that may compensate for the additional CPU cycles required for whatever else I have to put in. But not sure yet. That remains to be seen. One graphical anomaly I'll mention is that if a vehicle is occluded by a wall, it'll still be rendered. It would be technically possible for me to detect that situation and not draw it, but the processing required to do that is fairly high, considering that it's something that I really don't even notice for the most part when I'm playing the game. So I don't think I'm going to bother with that. So that's it for gameplay updates, but I wanted to say a bit more about what I've been doing on the technical side of things for those interested, because most of the work that I've been doing since my last update has actually been under the hood stuff that doesn't immediately affect gameplay. The first year since my last update, I didn't do any work on the game, but I've been working on it off and on over the past year, and most of that work has been related to optimization. At the time of my last update, just running the program with a single vehicle was taking around 35,000 cycles per frame, which really didn't leave me any room for anything else. So after a lot of trial and error and significant reworking of the track rendering engine, along with the vehicle physics, I was able to get it down to around 21,000 cycles per frame, which is about a 40% improvement. And part of that was writing custom drawing routines to allow me to do asynchronous drawing operations, along with a few other tricks. So I'm no longer using the BIOS routines for any drawing operations. And doing that required understanding how the hardware worked from a low level. And I mentioned before that I'm not a hardware guy. So, I started looking at schematics and data sheets and encountered a lot of terms and notation that I didn't understand. So I ended up having to read a book on electronics just to have the background that I needed to understand all this stuff. So anyway, the point that I'm making is that it's not that I've been ambivalent about this project. Quite the contrary. It's just that a lot of work went into just getting it to the point where I could support additional gameplay elements. The AI was actually the easiest thing. The AI logic was the easiest thing that I did in the past year. Even the collisions were harder. So with 3 vehicles, it runs at around 35,000 cycles. So it's basically back to where it was before with just 1 vehicle. Actually, that's true for most tracks, but the curvy track is a bit more demanding. Before the stress test was my worst performing track, but now it's this one, which is really as it should be, as this is the one that has the most number of lines on screen at any given time. So I think I'll just have to not have tracks this dense in the final game, or at least limit the number of AI vehicles that I have on them. Not all of the engine improvements were strictly related to performance. Some improved visuals or gameplay, so I wanted to talk about those for a bit. I mentioned in my last video that I was clipping lines at the screen edge, and one consequence of that is that the lines got brighter as they got shorter, which can be distracting. I'm no longer clipping, which I did for performance reasons, but an additional benefit of that is that the lines stay at constant brightness. It does mean that there's some overscan, but it's nowhere near what you would see in, say, pole position. Here's some footage from my simulator showing the overscan with the blue rectangle being the assumed screen limits. You do see a halo effect in V-Day with its default settings, but I don't really notice it when playing the game on an actual Vectrix, so I think it's a definite improvement from a visual standpoint. And another advantage to the approach of not clipping is, I mentioned in my first video that the engine supports 24 track directions, actually line directions. And the only reason the directions were restricted was to be able to perform efficient clipping. So now that I'm no longer clipping, the lines can go in any direction without restriction. I don't have any levels showing that yet, because I haven't updated my level editor, but it'll just give me more flexibility with track design when I eventually get into designing the final tracks for the game. Another graphical artifact that I mentioned in my last video that I didn't like were the breaks that would occur in the middle of lines. And I was able to get rid of that to some extent by using 16-bit scale factors and custom drawing routines. So you can see here I have some pretty long lines without any breaks in them. But a problem occurs if both endpoints of the line are off screen. Everything's fine as long as one end of the line is on screen. But if both endpoints are off screen, like in this case, I can't start drawing the line from off screen because it'll cause positioning issues. So I have to start somewhere in the middle of the line and then draw to one endpoint off screen, and then go back to that point and draw the other way. So it means that little dots can appear and disappear as you're racing around the track, which is a little distracting, but I think it's much less so than all of the dots that appeared on the lines before that were always there. So it's not ideal, but I do think it's an improvement over the past version. And one final visual improvement I wanted to mention is that previously, for reasons that I will spare you, deeper canyons had a bigger hit on performance. So in other words, the taller the canyon was, the slower it ran. And that's been completely resolved now. The height of the canyon doesn't have any impact on performance. So what that means is that I can have deeper canyons. And I find that not only looks cooler, but it also gives you a greater sense of speed, because the upper layer is moving faster than the lower layer at a rate that's proportional to the height of the canyon. So even though the game plays exactly the same, the canyon 3D effect is purely cosmetic. You do get a greater sense of speed. So that's about all I have to say. Thanks for watching. As always, I welcome feedback, and I will post another update the next time I have something significant to show. I'm not sure when that'll be yet, but I will promise that it will be less than 2 years from now. Bye.